I read Iron Widow by Xiran Zhao. This is a reread for me. It is a YA book, I guess. It's pretty dark for a YA book. Science fiction, fantasy. It's kind of an epic power fantasy about destroying the patriarchy with brute force using kind of anime style mechs in a Chinese culturally inspired science fiction universe where humans fight aliens. So it's pretty crazy. It's a lot of fun. The main setting is called Washa, which is kind of like in real life, it's the term that's used to broadly like reference the unifying culture of East Asia in the ancient world. And so you would have like Washa influence, in what we would call Korea today, Vietnam, Japan, and all of these places that, we think of China as this huge unified place, but in the ancient world, it was just as much a series of small kingdoms as any part of Europe as well. So they had like a shared cultural understanding, though, in the same way that like the Europe in the Mediterranean, you had like unified elements of cultural reference in like say between Greece and Italy and Egypt and Lebanon, or like throughout North America. Even though you had different groups of people in the ancient world, they had certain cultural touchstones that were in common. The same idea with Washoe culture. It's just a broad way of looking at a lot of different East Asian cultures in the ancient world in real life. Here in Iron Widow, Washoe is basically human civilization, and it's holding out against an onslaught of alien invaders who kind of represent a chaotic element that's trying to wipe out humanity for mysterious reasons. And a lot of the culture, like I said, takes its cues from ancient Chinese society. And so we have things like foot binding, which is the mutilation of young women's feet so that they can be socially acceptable to men because they marry off the daughters. There's a lot of Confucian style honoring your elders, obeying your father kind of culture that's happening. There are legends of an emperor and a kind of ancient lost kingdom and a worship of gods who are remote and mysterious, but somehow give order and legitimacy to the sages who rule over Washa in their stead. And so all of that stuff is, kind of borrowed broadly from East Asian culture, Chinese culture. The main character is Wu Xian, who, and that name is like the name of a real person. So if you know Chinese history and you hear that name, you're like, oh, that is like the first and only female emperor in Chinese history who comes in, right at the end of things before the rise of communism. But here in this story, she's a peasant girl who her older sister is drafted into the military and she's put into one of these mecha that fight the aliens. And the way that the mecha work, they have two pilots, a male and a female, much like the yin and yang. And they run on kind of the spiritual energy of the pilots. And the female in the pair operates as a kind of battery of spiritual energy for the male to draw on and use her power to, enhance his own power and make the robot do special things with that extra energy. The result of this is that the woman pretty much dies every time. So each time that the mecha goes out to fight, you're basically sacrificing the woman who gets into it in order to win the battle. And her sister is drafted in the military and then she is killed by the pilot in this exact way. And this causes Xian to hate that particular pilot and want to get revenge on him and hate the entire system of the military sacrificing women at a massive scale in order to fight this war. And she just basically is filled with rage at the patriarchy. And because of that, she volunteers to go into the military with the plan of killing this particular pilot in revenge for her sister. And so she successfully does that. Basically, she gets into the military, she gets recruited into his orbit. She is in the process of being seduced by him, I guess, or maybe she's tricking him. She doesn't really seem to be into it, but the main thing that she's trying to do is get him alone, and then she's going to stab him to death with a hairpin. And instead, there's an alien attack when they're together, which means that he has to get into his mech suit, and he drags her along with him. So she is going to be the sacrificial woman to win the battle for him, and he's going to drain all of her energy. And so once she gets into the mech, she fights against this with her mind, with her spirit, her soul, however you want to look at it. The two of them are kind of like entangled in a supernatural way while they're in the mech. And there's like a whole different plane of existence that has to do with yin yang. And the two of them contend basically. And instead of submitting to him and allowing him to use her power, she overwhelms him, saps him of his energy, and kills him, and then takes over the mech and wins the battle, like with his energy and her energy combined. And the mech is the nine-tailed fox, another East Asian legend. And she basically pilots it alone and is able to do all kinds of cool things because of her enormous willpower and spiritual energy. And then she defeats all of the alien creatures in the battlefield and then reveals herself to the cameras and all of Washa as, the lone pilot of the ship, which this is a very shocking revelation to everyone. And so all of that stuff right there is like it's like larger than life. It's operatic. Like I said, it's really delving into a power fantasy. As soon as she gets her hands on this weapon that she's never trained with, that she's never, she knows what everybody else knows from watching TV, the very few times that she's been allowed to, because usually women are not allowed to watch TV. She just instantly picks it up. And so there's tons of stories like this, adventure, power fantasy stories about men, and they, pick up a sword for the first time and they are one of the best swordsmen on the planet, like right at that moment, right? And so she has the same kind of thing. It makes a little bit more sense than what I just said. I think in terms of how the magical system works, there's a really cool element where the mech is hooked up to the pilot via acupuncture into their body, and this allows the flow of their life force energy, their ki, to go into the ship, and the ship basically becomes piloted the same way that we pilot, quote unquote, our bodies. And then it can like transform and change and all this stuff because of the special metal that it's made out of that, allows for this psychic bond that happens with the acupuncture. And so it kind of makes sense to me that she's just basically controlling a body. She's been controlling a body her whole life. She has a rough idea of what the mechs are capable of, and she just, goes right off and is able to do it. Everyone's blown away by her abilities, and then they're shocked to find out that she's a woman. And this starts her on her journey to, by the end of the book, she'll end up being the Empress. I think a lot of the ways that the story is calibrated for the character, like I said, this is dark, and there is all kinds of darkness to it, but there is this power fantasy element as well. And a lot of the way that like we meet Jetien's parents at the beginning of the story, and they're like cartoonishly negligent and mean to her. Her father is overly harsh, her mother is overly submissive, and there's not much depth to them. And I don't think that this is a mistake. All of the complicated like layers to the characters are given to the younger characters, the teenagers who are the main focus of the story. And a lot of the adult characters come off as flatter and completely morally compromised. So her parents are beyond neglectful and are just, like abusively complicit with the patriarchal military system of their society. And so all adults are throughout the story are characterized as complicit and corrupt and morally bereft. They don't see anything wrong with their behavior, while the teenaged characters are able to see like layers of gray. They have the ability to, think one thing but do another. And there's no way in which the story ever implies that the parents or any of the other adults are doing similar kinds of things. I think this is part of what gives the book its operatic tone. The whole thing is a little bit elevated outside of a realistic psychological portrayal, and instead, I think, goes deeper down into an authentic emotional portrayal of what it feels like to be a woman in a patriarchal system that is exploiting and killing women in order to enrich itself, to reproduce itself, and expecting women to simultaneously like be submissive, but also manage the behavior of their husbands, to be responsible for the household, but to not be allowed to make money for the household or have any independence. There's all kinds of contradictions and injustices that are laid out in the story over and over and over again. And we're made to feel as if the entire culture is set up to be driven by a sense of kind of fear and inadequacy of men against women. So like men are terrified that women might be better than them. And so they're holding them down in all of these various ways is how it feels to me in the story. And the response to that, the authentic kind of emotional catharsis of the story, I think, that happens again and again and again, is Jetien is able to, with brute force and just willpower, and by virtue of being the hero of the story, shatter the patriarchal society with her just like brute force. And so she doesn't have to be deeply politically conniving. She doesn't have to become complicit in various ways. Instead, she's just able to kind of spit in the face of everyone who would otherwise use their power to hold her back, to hold her down, to take away her freedom and autonomy in the future. When she first takes control of the nine-tailed fox and she reveals herself to the crowd, she calls herself your worst nightmare to the cameras that are recording the battle. So this is kind of an announcement to the entire culture of Washa. And I think what she means there is a woman in control of the mech, or a woman who didn't die the way that she was quote unquote supposed to, and instead like has the power to get revenge, to fight back. The military responds to this by teaming her up with basically the most dangerous pilot in the world, the most powerful pilot, but he's also a criminal because he killed his own family. We find out that he killed his family because they were like the other men in his family, because they were raping women, because they were being bad men, in ways that we as readers would recognize them as being bad. And so the entire culture kind of hates Jian and also hates Shimin. It's so both of them are hated, but we as the readers respect both of them because of the way that they are fighting against the injustices of their society and that they're being punished for it at the same time. So it's an element that binds them together, but when they initially meet, they don't get along at all. And Jian is like really combative with him and doesn't trust him at all, obviously, because, like every time that he goes out and does a battle, the woman who goes out with him dies. And so when they go out and battle together, she's fighting against him so hard that they end up both surviving. And this is a pretty rare thing that can happen, but, doesn't happen often. And they're made into a consort team. Like basically they're married because of their ability to coexist, for her ability to survive the battles instead of getting sacrificed to superpower the mech. They're able to do things with the mech that nobody else can do because they are both so powerful, but they don't work well together because they don't trust each other. Over time, they form a romantic relationship. And then also, Jian has kind of a boyfriend from her hometown who's this rich kid. And he also becomes a love interest, and the three of them work together. He's also part of the military at this point. And they end up forming a kind of polyamorous relationship where all three of them are interested in each other romantically and sexually. And usually in a story, you will have like a love triangle, especially a lot of YA situations with a female protagonist. She'll have two boys that she's going to choose between. And a lot of dramatic tension is drawn out from that love triangle situation. This story kind of puts that to the side and has the three of them enter into a polyamorous situation. The point of a love triangle in the story is to invest the different potential partners with aspects of personality or destiny that the main character needs to choose between, needs to make a choice to go in one direction and not to go in another. And that's the real dramatic stakes of the love triangle. But kind of baked into that whole situation is a patriarchal expectation of romantic fidelity to one person, because that way we know exactly who the father of every baby is, right? Like that's part of the point of people getting married in patriarchal society, is so that we can track the lineage of people so that property and wealth can be correctly, quote unquote, transmitted through the generations. By having the relationship be polyamorous instead of, normal love triangle, I think there's still a choice when it comes to this novel. Some other novels also I've seen do a polyamorous thing and kind of think they're creatively kind of quote unquote solving a problem, but really they're just undermining their own ability to create drama, in my opinion. And they're kind of missing the point of, making a choice means that you have to sacrifice one thing in order to get the other thing. Like that is the dramatic stakes of any choice in a story. Those stakes exist in this case, though. So it's not giving up on that. Instead, what's happening here is a rejection of conforming to the regular requirements of society and the way in which Jian is supposed to be faithful to one man. And that man, is going to be her pilot until she is killed to power the mech. Instead, she's saying, no, I'm going to take what I want. I'm going to be part of something where we get what we desire. instead of what we are, quote unquote, supposed to have. And so there is a choice being made here. The choice is to reject society, which is the choice that Xian makes over and over throughout the story. It's important that these three characters get together for how the ending works. Basically, the three of them are planning a kind of revolution to overturn the military. They find out a secret about the mechs, that they are designed to inhibit the abilities of the females in order to favor the males, and so that the males can sap their energy. And so if you take two people of equal spiritual power and put them into the mech, the one that sits in the female seat is going to be less powerful than the one who sits in the male seat. And so this is a really clear kind of allegorical metaphor for the way in which patriarchal power is systemic. It's set up by society. It's not necessarily the choice of individuals per se, but is the way that things are built. And so, you enter into a company and women get paid less money because, as across the entire market of employed people, women are paid less than men. And so it doesn't have much to do with any particular business or employer. It's the entire system is set up that way deliberately, because that's part of the point of the system, is to be male supremacist. And so it's just literally true here as part of the military industrial complex. It's set up so that men sacrifice women to get power. And so they threaten basically that they're going to tell everybody about this. There's going to be a really big battle. And when they win it together with the three of them, then they're going to tell everybody the truth. And that's the plan. That's going to kick off the revolution, and they're going to overturn this dystopian patriarchal system and kind of reform society, give women equal rights, and all of that kind of thing. What they don't know is that they're walking into a trap. And the military knows exactly what their plan is, and they have a counter plan where they're basically going to put them in a battle that they can't win, and they die, and the military gets to, be boo-hoo, the heroes, oh, it's a tragedy. Make sure to send your daughters and sign up for more. Maybe they also will be able to pilot a mech by themselves, and kind of use Xian as a propaganda to get more women to conform to the patriarchal system. So once they're in the battle, the trap is sprung, and Shimin, the one who is the criminal, the one who is the co-pilot, he realizes what's going to happen, and so he ejects the other two and then stays in the mech and takes the hit, and the whole thing explodes and he dies. And so he sacrifices himself to save his friends. And their enemies think that they got all three of them, and so they're satisfied with this outcome. And then what happens is Xian goes off and finds another mythical mech out here, and it's piloted by the ancient mythical emperor of the 200 years ago, and he is still in it, and she's able to revive him and heal him, and then puts him in the woman's seat, and she takes the man's seat and drives this mech, and then turns the table on her enemies, and ends up completely displacing the military leaders, displacing the government leaders, declaring herself empress, and kind of overturning all of society. So again, it's that whole power fantasy thing. And then there's all kinds of inversions of everything that we thought we knew that come in at the end and kind of build up the sequel of the book, where we find out that the aliens that they've been fighting this whole time are not actually aliens. They are the native species of the planet, and that the humans came here on spaceships and they are the invaders. And so the entire military industrial complex is like a colonial operation that is oppressing and displacing the local indigenous population in exactly the way that like imperialism operates. And so in trying to fight against the patriarchy, it on a larger scale, like when you zoom out, for Jian, it doesn't matter because she's already complicit in a unfair, oppressive imperial system towards, non-human creatures. And so this makes her like a hypocrite, and it's like a big problem that she's going to have to deal with in the sequel. And then we also find out that the gods, who are really mysterious throughout the book, have somehow taken the body of Ximen, and he didn't die in his noble sacrifice moment, but instead has been like transported, quote unquote, to the heavens and is with the gods, and that they need to not tell everybody the truth about, humans being the colonizers, or he will be killed. And so they start to exert force and pressure on her, even though she's the empress. It turns out there's a higher power, and she's going to have to fight the gods in order to get her romantic partner back, but also to do what she wants to do. I think Wu Xian's character is like fascinating, a lot of fun to read, but really dark and morally complicated. Like, I don't think that we should feel as readers 100% okay with all of her choices. It feels like she goes too far really often. She is very passionate, and she makes decisions that are based in emotion and not always based in like wisdom. And that while it's very satisfying for her to go in there and wreck things, there's a sense in which she is doing violence to herself in order to get justice on a larger scale for womankind in her society. There's an element of like, you fight monsters and it makes you into a monster, and that there's a kind of arc to that in the book. I think it's subtle, but it's there. The book doesn't really feel bad about it necessarily. It more feels like it makes her even more badass. And the book has like a real feeling of self-righteousness and unapologetic joy in her rage and in her power that comes from her rage, that I think is fascinating. Like it's a lot of fun to read, but it is also simultaneously disturbing. And so I think that's a really good alchemy. It's really powerful. It leaves you thinking when you leave the book and like pondering, like, what does this mean to me? How do I really feel about it? Would, if this was happening in my world, would I feel okay about it? And it makes you think about like the real world in terms of, am I comfortable with what the military is doing in my name? Am I comfortable with these patriarchal systems that sacrifice women? I'm a man, for my benefit. Am I really doing everything that I can to make life better for the women around me and protecting their lives and things like that? So it leaves you feeling uncomfortable in many different ways, or at least it does for me, which is more than I would usually expect for a YA novel. Not that YA isn't complicated and full of all kinds of nuance and whatnot, but I think this book is especially powerful in really interesting ways, and then is also constructed in ways that feel really fresh because of borrowing from, East Asian history and culture, and then putting the setting into this really creative place of like a deep future with all of these science fiction elements and the aliens and then all the twists that you get at the end. So there's a lot of cool stuff happening in Iron Widow that is always interesting to come back to.